Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling one of those incredible pieces of technology that feels almost like science fiction, the cochlear implant.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. And we're looking at it through a particular lens today using this online simulator that aims to show how it all works.
Right. So, our mission really is to unpack the cochlear implant itself, what it is,
Yeah.
then see how this specific simulator helps that whole process.
And then maybe look ahead a bit. The sources talk about making these simulators even better learning tools.
Exactly. Using this tool as a jumping off point to get a clear picture both of the tech and how we can learn about it.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's unpack this. First off, what exactly is a cochlear implant? Fundamentally.
Well, at its heart, it's an electronic device. It's designed for people with severe hearing loss or deafness.
Okay.
And the really key idea is that it doesn't just make sounds louder like a hearing aid. It actually bypasses the damaged parts of the ear.
Ah, okay. So it's not working with the natural hearing mechanism in the same way?
Not at all. It takes a direct route. It stimulates the auditory nerve itself.
Directly. How does it manage that?
It's basically got two main parts. There's an external bit, the processor, that you wear, often behind the ear,
Right, I've seen those.
and that captures the sound. Then there's the internal part, the implant itself, which is placed surgically under the skin.
Okay, so the outside part grabs the sound. How does it get that information? Well, inwards, and then to the nerve.
So the external processor takes the sound, converts it into digital information, and then into electrical signals.
Got it.
These signals are sent wirelessly right through the skin using a kind of transmitter coil system to the internal implant.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. The internal part gets these signals. Then what?
It receives those signals and turns them into electrical impulses, tiny pulses of electricity.
Right?
And these impulses travel down a very fine wire, which has an array of electrodes on its tip.
Electrodes. And where do they go?
That electrode array is carefully threaded into the cochlea, that spiral-shaped part of the inner ear.
Yeah, the snail shell thing.
Exactly. Normally, sound vibrations cause fluid movement in there, triggering nerve cells. But here, the electrodes do the job directly. They stimulate different points along the cochlea.
And different points mean different sounds or frequencies.
Precisely, frequencies. The sound processor analyzes the incoming sound, breaks it down into different frequency bands like high notes, low notes, and everything in between.
Okay.
Then it sends the signal for each frequency band to a specific electrode or a small group of electrodes at a particular place along that array inside the cochlea.
So it's mapping sound frequencies onto physical locations on the nerves.
That's a great way to put it. It creates this electrical pattern that represents the sound's frequency content.
And the brain. What does it make of these electrical patterns?
Well, that's the truly amazing part. The brain receives these patterns through the auditory nerve. Initially, it's just electrical noise, probably.
Right.
But over time, with therapy and practice, the brain learns to interpret these patterns. It starts to recognize them as sound, as speech, as music, as environmental noises. The brain adapts.
Wow. So it's not just the device, it's the brain learning a whole new way to hear.
Exactly. It's a partnership between the technology and the brain's plasticity.
Okay, that's a complex journey from sound wave to brain interpretation. How does this simulator we're focusing on help make sense of that?
Right. So this simulator leverages pretty standard web tech. It uses something called the Web Audio API to grab and analyze sound.
From my computer's microphone, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. Or potentially other audio sources. And then it uses the HTML5 Canvas API that's for drawing graphics in a web browser to create a real-time visualization.
I talk, it listens, it draws something. What does it draw?
It analyzes your voice or whatever sound is coming in for its frequency content. How much energy is in the low frequencies, the mids, the highs.
Like an equalizer display on a stereo?
Sort of, yeah. You might see bars representing that frequency energy, but crucially, it also shows a representation of the electrode array, often as a circle of dots or nodes.
Ah, representing the electrodes inside the cochlea.
Precisely. And as the sound changes, different electrodes on the screen light up. Their brightness or color changes based on the energy and the specific frequency bands they're assigned to.
So you literally see which parts of the simulated nerve pathway are being stimulated by different parts of the sound.
You got it. It's a visual map of frequency to electrode activity happening live.
And it's interactive, you said.
Yeah, that's a key part. You can actually play around with settings. For example, you can change the simulated number of electrodes.
And the sources mention that more electrodes generally allow for, what, a finer resolution of sound?
That's the idea, yes. More electrodes potentially mean you can represent the frequency details more accurately. So toggling that number in the simulator gives you a visual sense of how signal resolution might change.
What else can you adjust?
You can also use filters, like turn on a low-pass filter to only let low frequencies through, or a high-pass for only high frequencies.
And you'd see the visualization change immediately.
Instantly. You'd see only the electrodes corresponding to those allowed frequencies light up. It makes the whole concept of frequency processing really concrete.
That sounds pretty powerful. How easy is it for someone, maybe a student or just someone curious, to actually use this?
Well, according to the sources, that's one of its big advantages. It's built using standard web stuff, HTML, CSS, JavaScript,
Meaning?
meaning it just runs of your web browser. Chrome, Firefox, Edge, the usual suspects. No need to download or install special software.
Okay, that's really accessible then.
Yeah, and it's designed to be responsive, so it should adapt to different screen sizes, like tablets or maybe even phones.
What stands out to you the most about this current version of the simulator?
For me, it really is that direct visual feedback. Seeing the sound, maybe even my sound, directly controlling which simulated electrodes activate. It just clicks. It makes that abstract idea of frequency mapping feel much more real.
Yeah, I can see that. And you mentioned microphone input. What about privacy? People are rightly cautious about that.
Very important point. The source material is quite clear. All the audio processing, the analysis, the visualization, it all happens right there on your own device in your browser.
So nothing is sent over the internet.
Correct. It doesn't store your audio, doesn't transmit it anywhere. It's purely for educational visualization, not for diagnosis or anything like that, obviously.
Right, purely illustrative. Okay, so the current simulator provides this great visual, the starting point, but the sources also talk about, well, taking it further, right? Making it even more insightful.
Absolutely. There's a clear vision outlined for moving beyond just showing the process, to letting users really experience how changes affect things.
What's one key idea there?
A big one is allowing users to tweak more parameters, like not just the number of electrodes, but maybe their simulated placement within the cochlea, or exactly how frequencies get mapped to them.
Okay.
And here's the kicker. The idea is to then immediately let you hear a simulated version of the sound processed with those new settings.
Ah. So not just see the lights change, but actually hear the difference.
Exactly. That would be a huge leap. Imagine adjusting the frequency map and hearing how it makes speech sound clearer or maybe muddier. That creates a much deeper, intuitive grasp of what those settings do.
That sounds incredibly powerful for understanding. What else?
Another really interesting suggestion is incorporating different simulated hearing loss profiles.
How would that work?
You could maybe select a profile representing, say, high-frequency hearing loss. Then you'd see and ideally hear how the implant simulation compensates, or maybe struggles, with that specific type of impairment.
Wow, that adds a whole layer of context. And empathy, perhaps.
For sure. And then there are ideas for more detailed visual aids, too. Maybe animations showing the implant inside the cochlea model, seeing the electricity flow.
Connecting the electronics to the biology, visually?
Precisely. And making it more relevant to everyday life, the sources mention simulating challenging listening environments.
Like trying to hear speech in a noisy restaurant?
Exactly that kind of thing. Understanding speech and noise is a major real-world factor for implant users. Simulating that and maybe showing how different processing strategies help or hinder, that would be incredibly valuable.
Yeah, connecting the tech directly to the lived experience.
And one more thing, letting users save their settings, like save configuration A, configuration B, and then directly compare the simulated sound output of each.
So you could systematically experiment. What happens if I do this versus that?
Right, it supports a more structured learning approach. And these are not just vague ideas, the sources indicate a plan to research how to build these things, looking at audio processing techniques, modeling hearing loss, user interface design for saving states, and so on.
So they're thinking about the technical challenges involved.
Definitely. It seems the goal is to move from a cool demonstration to a really robust, personal learning laboratory.
If you connect that to the bigger picture, then these enhancements really shift the focus, don't they?
They really do. It goes from showing what happens in a cochlear implant,
To letting you explore how different factors influence the outcome, why certain adjustments matter.
and maybe even getting a tiny glimpse into what it might sound like for someone using the device in different situations. It becomes much more experiential.
So bringing this all together, what does this mean for you, the listener? Why have we spent time digging into this simulator?
Well, first off, hopefully it's giving you a kind of shortcut, a way to grab a really complex medical technology without just reading dense text. We use the simulator concept as a guide.
And it really highlights the potential of these interactive learning tools, doesn't it? Moving beyond just absorbing information to actually playing with it, experimenting, even if it's in a simulation.
Yeah, the sources clearly see huge potential there for making complex science much more accessible and engaging.
And maybe you picked up some surprising facts along the way, like how crucial the brain's learning process is in making sense of those electrical signals.
Right, it's not just about the signal delivery. It's about the brain interpreting that signal, building perception over time. The difference between raw electrical pulses and the rich experience of sound is largely constructed in the brain.
So, our goal here was really to use this specific example, the implant simulator, to give you a clearer, maybe more engaging handle on cochlear implants themselves, and also on this exciting direction for educational tech,
Yeah, we went from the basics, how the implant bypasses damaged hearing,
to exploring how the current simulator visualizes that frequency mapping.
and then looked at those potential enhancements, ideas that could make these tools profoundly more insightful for learning.
It's just a really potent example of technology meeting biology and how digital tools can help us understand those intricate connections.
It really is. And it leaves you with something to think about, perhaps. Consider this. The implant delivers this path of electrical signals based on sound frequencies. The brain then learns to interpret this as sound.
Right.
So how much of the richness, the detail, the quality of the sound that someone eventually perceives, how much of that is inherent in the sophistication of the electrical signal the implant provides? And how much is actually constructed, learned, refined by the brain itself as it adapts to this entirely new kind of input over months, maybe years? Where does the signal end and the brain's interpretation begin?